Hi, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes, or actually just less than 1 minute, just a few seconds, really. Hi, welcome everyone. Um, Welcome to today's webinar on chronic oil pollution in the world's ocean, new insights, enhanced tools, and emerging solutions. And we're very pleased to welcome Eric Teller and Christian Thomas of SkyTruth today to present on this. We're glad they can be with us. My name is Sarah Carr, and I'm Chief Knowledge Broker for OCTO, which stands for Open Communications for the Ocean. For those of you who aren't familiar with Octo, we're an NGO that connects ocean professionals to the knowledge and networks they need through our webinar series and our MPA Help, EBM Help, and Ocean Plastic List communities. Octo also provides custom consulting services. This webinar will last for an hour. We'll have a formal presentation and demonstration from Eric and Christian, and that'll be followed by a question and answer period. You can submit questions throughout the webinar. You can submit them either through the Q&A um, button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or through the chat. For the chat, you can make questions and comments visible to just Christian, Eric, and I. Just you can ask technical questions just to me, or you can send comments and questions to the entire audience. We just ask that if you're sending any chats or questions to everyone, that you keep it on topic and keep it professional. Um, a recording of the webinar will be available later today on Okta's website on our webinars page. And so thank you, everyone, for being here. I'll turn it over to Christian and Eric now. We really appreciate you guys coming to speak today about Cerulean's latest work.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'll just share my screen and start getting into our presentation. We have a lot of content to show you. Um, my name is Eric Teller. I'm SkyTruth's Impact Program Manager. So I work to connect our data and tools to folks who can use them out in the world to do some good. I'm joined by Christian Thomas, our geospatial engineer. And together, we're going to tell you a little bit about the issue of chronic oil pollution in the world's oceans and what we've done to confront it over the last several years of programming, technological development, and outreach. So I know we've presented some aspects of this work before, so some of you may already be familiar with us, but just as an introduction or reintroduction, SkyTruth is an NGO based in the United States that for the last 25 years has been building conservation technology tools and data sets using primarily Earth observation data, that is satellite imagery and related contextual data sets, now branching out into artificial intelligence as well. And the goal of all of this is to increase transparency around what's happening regarding environmental conditions and pollution around the world. We work particularly extensively at sea, where often polluters feel that they can get away with anything because there's limited human observation. And back in the mid 2010s, we worked with partners to build Global Fishing Watch and spin it off as an independent NGO. And we also have a long-standing focus on oil spills and oil and gas pollution, which is what we're going to talk about primarily today. So this focus of ours really began back in 2010, 15 years ago, when we watched BP's Deepwater Horizon well blow out in the Gulf of Mexico. And we noticed that BP was or seemed to be underreporting the extent and severity of the resulting oil spill. SkyTruth's staff at the time used satellite imagery to demonstrate that the minimum amount of the spill was 25 times larger than BP had been reporting. So this allowed the record to be corrected, became a major news story. BP paid a significantly higher fine than they otherwise might have. And we all watched this become the largest oil spill in history. And this really demonstrated the potential of satellite imagery to reveal the extent of oil spills in the world's ocean. But it also got us thinking about some of the smaller spills that completely escape media attention, what we call chronic oil pollution. These types of smaller but still significant oil slicks accumulate over time in the same locations for years on end. The two primary sources are vessels transiting a region and dumping oily wastewater, and fossil fuel infrastructure out at sea that's doing the same in the same location. Uh, as you can see here, these are radar images of paradigmatic cases of a vessel slick on the top left and two infrastructure slicks on the bottom right. Both of these are very easily visible on satellite radar imagery. Vessel slicks are long and thin because the vessels are moving as they dump them, whereas infrastructure slicks are influenced more by wind and currents since they come from a stationary source. But in both cases, they have a pretty clear footprint. And we thought that we could teach an AI model to recognize the signature associated with these slicks and flag potential slicks for human review. That led to the creation of Cerulean, which is the world's first free, open source, and automatic oil pollution detection platform. We launched this in 2023. You're seeing a screenshot of the user interface right here. And initially, it focused primarily on vessel slicks because that was the easier thing to teach the model how to recognize. But over the last couple of years, we've made significant improvements to Cerulean, particularly with the detection of infrastructure slicks. And I'm going to turn it over to Christian, my colleague, geospatial engineer, who leads our work on that front, to talk a little bit about our recent investigations into the extent of infrastructure slicks and the many improvements we've made to the Cerulean user interface to facilitate the detection of oil pollution.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Hopefully my screen share is coming through. Yeah, so I was talking with our team, and I think the last time that we demoed the Cerulean platform as part of a presentation for Octo was back in November of last year, and we've made a lot of improvements to our platform and the algorithms that power it since then. And all of these are sort of implemented and designed with the idea that they align with our strategy of focusing on polluter accountability and making it easier for advocates to take action based on the data that Cerulean provides. So the first feature that I want to highlight that we've added is our MMSI search. So you're now able to search for specific vessels based on their MMSI number. And I see any slicks which Cerulean has identified associated with them. And let's see. Maybe I need to clear this date range. We'll try again. And if not, I have a backup. This vessel that we're looking at here, which hopefully we'll be loading in just a moment, has two slicks associated with it. You can't, it's a little difficult to see from this view here. Yeah, so we have one identified in the Gulf of Mexico and another off the Italian coast. We can zoom into the slick itself. So what we're looking at here is the slick identified by Cerulean. This bright spot here is the vessel which we believe is the responsible party. And we have you can sort of view the AIS track for the vessel, see how that aligns with this Cerulean detection. And so one of the other things that we're very excited to demo for you all today is our new source profile feature. So this is a dashboard where we compile information about the vessel that is the likely source of a slick. And hopefully this will load in soon. But this contains information about the ship itself, as well as other data about its history or its past slicks that may have been associated with the past. I think this might be a little slow, so I'm gonna run to the backup slide that we have. So this is the same vessel. The source profile that you'll see when it loads in includes identifying information about the vessel, images of the vessel if they're accessible via marine traffic, as well as information about the total number of slicks detected and area associated with those slicks for each vessel. And we also now flag AIS off events, which you'll see here. These are events that our partners at Global Fishing Watch identify based on certain parameters about the length of time between AIS broadcast gaps, distance from shore, and the quality of satellite AIS coverage. And we think that providing this information is critical for helping to identify behaviors of concern. So are these ships engaged in activities which may be worth a closer look? So we'll go back to Cerulean. So some of the other features which we've added recently include the ability to upload custom AOIs. So this is a feature that allows users to identify areas that they're specifically interested in, and then use that to filter for slicks which may have taken place in proximity to those locations. We've also been working with our partners at Global Fishing Watch. So our Cerulean algorithm now has a improved infrastructure detection ability. So what we're looking at here are slicks that are associated with a piece of fixed oil infrastructure in the North Sea that have been identified by Global Fishing Watch. And we can look at slicks which have been associated with this piece of fixed infrastructure through time. And then the sort of the final feature we want to highlight as a major improvement has been our work to identify dark vessels. So vessels which are not currently broadcasting AIS at the time when a slick takes place, as a critical way to identify when bad actors are operating. So this is a vessel which is identified as the likely source of the slick which we see here. It is not broadcasting AIS information at this time, so we're not able to pair it to anything, but I think this is a sort of a critical step of being able to identify hotspots of behavior which may benefit from additional scrutiny or enforcement. I do want to highlight as well that all of these improvements that we've been making to Cerulean are accessible via our API. So if you're interested in interacting with Cerulean via an API, we have that available. And then before we move on from Cerulean, I just want to give you all a little teaser for some of the work that we have coming up. We're actively looking for collaborators to help support the work that we're doing to identify offshore methane venting. And we're also working to improve the data set of offshore oil infrastructure along with our partners at Global Fishing Watch. And we would really love to be able to add ownership information to that platform data. So if anyone has information about ownership or is interested in collaborating, we would really, really love to talk to you about all of that. And so with that, come back and shift gears a little bit to talk about the work that we're doing with our partners through the at Global Fishing Watch through the Open Ocean Initiative, which has the goal of illustrating the scope and impacts of the offshore oil and gas industry. And just before I dive specifically into that work, I do want to offer a little bit of context on the terminology that I'll be using here. So our analyses focus primarily on two types of oil and gas infrastructure, the first of which is fixed oil infrastructure. And this is a data set of stationary offshore oil infrastructure locations, which have been identified by our partners at Global Fishing Watch. This doesn't differentiate between structure types, so it includes things like platforms and mooring buoys, as well as offshore terminals. And then the second term that I'll be using is FXO, which is the collective term that we use for the vessels which are engaged in the production, storage, and offloading of oil and gas. And that includes vessels like FPSOs, FSOs, FSRUs, and FLNGs. And we can see two examples. So here on the top are two images of different types of fixed oil infrastructure. And then here at the bottom is an FPSO included in our FXO data set. Additionally, I'd like to mention that the work that I'm discussing was published in a report earlier this year, which is accessible via the link here on the slide, as well as on our website. And, I think we'll be making this, hopefully we'll be making the slide deck available as well after the presentation. But This report and our analysis expands on and improves Global Fishing Watch's data set of offshore infrastructure to create the first data set that details where the global FXO fleet is located and operating. We've also assessed a variety of climate impacts that are associated with the operation of FXOs and fixed oil infrastructure, and then looked into the impacts that are attributable to the network of vessels which interact with both of those. And we're really doing this to provide useful and actionable data for free to organizations that are working on the ground to achieve positive environmental outcomes and help protect our world's oceans, coastal ecosystems, and communities. So just to dive into this, what we're dealing with here, this map is showing us sort of the global footprint of offshore oil and gas, and focuses on the 24,000 pieces of fixed oil infrastructure that have been identified by Global Fishing Watch since 2017, using a combination of Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 imagery, and we see those displayed here on the map in these blue points, as well as the data set of 326 FXO operating locations, which SkyTruth has identified since 2013, displayed here in orange. And this is our starting point for analyzing how offshore oil is impacting our oceans and our climate. Digging into the fixed oil infrastructure first, what this chart here is showing us is the number of pieces of fixed oil infrastructure detected over time. And what we see is that there's been a decline in the amount of oil infrastructure from a high that was recorded in 2020. And we think that this decline helps to illustrate why we assess FXOs as a separate category, despite the fact that FXOs themselves represent only roughly 1.4% of the global offshore oil infrastructure. And the reason for that is because the number of FXOs in operation has actually been increasing since 2013. And this is driven by a number of factors, including like increases in the exploration of deep sea oil and gas. Deep sea oil exploration requires particular types of vessel-like movable and floating oil platforms, such as FXOs. And FXOs, in addition to being able to operate in deeper water, have industrial advantages of being more easy to move to other operating locations and being cheaper and quicker to establish and stand up than a traditional oil platform may be. So now we want to take a look at the impacts of oil and gas, and I want to start with the assessment of greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with FXO operation. So we use data provided by the Environmental Markets Lab at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and we're utilizing engine power tables that they have to calculate the emissions that are associated with FXOs based on their engine size. And what we found is that in 2023, the emissions that are associated with FXO chemical storage were estimated to be 1.5 million metric tons of CO2. And these estimates are based on an assumption that FXOs have similar emissions profiles to oil tankers, and that vessels like FLNGs have similar emissions to gas tankers when they're anchored. But I do want to highlight that these emissions are likely substantially underestimated because the assessment that we've done doesn't account for emissions related to the production of oil and gas, and is strictly a measure of the estimated energy required to store it on these vessels until it is offloaded. But I think, as we all know, there's a lot more to the impact of offshore infrastructure than just their operation or the storage of oil and gas on these vessels or pieces of fixed infrastructure. There's a vast network of vessels which interact with this infrastructure to support their existence through maintenance, crew and supply transportation, and the transfer and transport of oil from FXOs and fixed oil infrastructure. So we're using data provided by MLab, and pairing that with AIS broadcast information provided by Global Fishing Watch to describe the carbon footprint of these vessels. One of the things that we found is that the emissions from these vessels have been steadily increasing due to increased vessel traffic, as well as the use of larger and larger vessels being used to transport oil. So in 2023, voyage emissions from the vessels that visited fixed oil infrastructure and FXOs was estimated to be around 9 million metric tons of CO2. But again, I want to highlight here that this is likely lower than the actual emissions because these results are based strictly on what we can observe using AIS broadcast data, and we know that not all vessels are being publicly tracked. So again, this map here is showing the tracks of vessels that interact with FXOs in orange, as well as the tracks of vessels that interacted with fixed oil infrastructure in blue. So one of the final variable that we examined as part of this report was that of oil pollution and then being associated with FXOs and fixed oil infrastructure. So as we've touched on already, Cerulean is an incredibly powerful platform that we believe to identify these slicks. And so what we're looking at here is an example of one of those Cerulean detected slicks associated with an FXO off the coast of Indonesia. And what we did is we conducted an assessment of all of the slicks that Cerulean had detected between June of 2023 and October of 2024 to identify the most polluting fixed oil infrastructure and FXOs. And so our analysis then takes this and ranks polluters based on the frequency of slicks observed in Sentinel-1 imagery. So I'll touch on just sort of our general findings for both FXOs and fixed oil infrastructure. The first of which, FXOs. So we can see here the global map. These are the 10 most polluting FXO operating locations. During that June to October interval, June 2023 to October 24, we found that the top 10 polluting FXOs were responsible for an observed 64 detected slicks, totaling over 79,000 gallons of oil. And then looking again at the top 10 pieces of fixed oil infrastructure, here's the global map with a few insets. These pieces of fixed oil infrastructure responsible for 164 total detected slicks, totaling over 215,000 gallons of oil. And we know that there is a lot more work to be done to fully account for the impacts of the offshore oil and gas industry. So in the year to come, some of the things we're planning to explore are the potential to identify fugitive methane emissions from infrastructure, potentially based on flare frequency analyses. We're also looking into exploring the emissions that are associated with the production of oil and gas at both fixed oil infrastructure locations and FXOs. But I do want to highlight, we understand that offshore oil production is an incredibly nuanced industry and that the data needs vary significantly based on location, as well as the campaigns being worked on. So we would really love to hear from you all about how we might be able to support the work that you're doing and the conservation goals that you have. And so with that, I think I'll hand it back to Eric.
Sure. Thank you, Christian. And I see some questions popping up in the chat already, which we're really excited to get to. But first, I wanted to share a little bit about how we're working to apply this data in practice and help people use it to make change through their various means of campaigning, law enforcement, etc. And we really hope that this serves as inspiration to some of you who may also have ideas about how this can be used. And in those cases, we'd be really eager to get in touch with you and have a chat. So first of all, we see this data, particularly the new infrastructure report that Christian was just talking about, as a really powerful advocacy tool. We're in contact with a lot of organizations working in the ocean advocacy space, working in advocacy for the energy transition, for sustainable development. And one thing that's of grave concern to these folks is that oil and gas is not really being talked about as a threat to the oceans. It's talked about in climate spaces, but at major ocean convenings where policymakers gather, oil and gas is often conspicuously absent from the conversation. And we're helping to change that by injecting this data into the discussion at major global convenings. You can see some images on this slide of engagement that SkyTruth staff have been part of at the Our Ocean conference, where we formally launched the infrastructure report, and at the UN Ocean Conference, where we were part of several side events demonstrating that fossil fuels are a threat to meeting marine 30 by 30 goals, to coastal fisherfolk communities, and to wildlife and ecology in these extractive landscapes around the world. So this is really helping to change the conversation around fossil fuels. moving away from messaging that's simply about the abstract threat of carbon emissions towards messaging that's really resonating more on the ground about the real local ramifications of significant fossil fuel build out, demonstrating that these projects are associated with major increases in vessel traffic, local oil pollution, and significant coastal industrialization. Our partners are working locally to bring this data to their own communities, and we're working at global convenings to make sure that this is becoming part of the conversation. And I think in the last year or so, we've seen a really significant increase in fossil fuels as a topic of conversation at these types of gatherings. Secondly, we're finding that this is potentially quite useful for maritime security and the enforcement of laws against environmental crime. One of the major victories we've had in the last few months is the integration of Cerulean data with Skylight, which is a significant maritime domain awareness system used by over 40 countries to monitor their coastal and ocean territories. And so now here you can see a screenshot of the Skylight platform showing the same vessel that Christian just showed you that's been associated with two oil slicks. This now links directly to Cerulean, where you can view that potential oil slick and have that flagged for you. And this is potentially quite interesting. We have a lot of people who come up to me and ask, can I use Cerulean data to prosecute someone for dumping oil? This type of bilge dumping is illegal under the Marine Pollution Convention, has been for 50 years, also illegal under many national laws and conventions, regional policies. But the question is always, how do you prosecute it? And in most cases, that requires an actual water sample, direct observation by law enforcement, or an inspection of the vessel itself, demonstrating that the bilge water equipment has been tampered with. So usually you can't use a satellite image alone to prosecute a vessel. What you can do through solutions like this is identify vessels that have a pattern of suspicious behavior or repeat pollution and say, okay, we're going to inspect this vessel when it enters our waters. That helps law enforcement agencies apply their resources more efficiently to find and prevent this type of crime. So this is an emerging use case for Cerulean that we're really excited to keep pursuing. And then thirdly, we find Cerulean a really useful investigative tool to create visualizations and reports for the public that demonstrate the extent of chronic oil pollution. We recently worked with Greenpeace in Bulgaria to do exactly that. In this investigation that broke just on Monday, actually, we conducted the painstaking work of conducting human expert review of every potential slick detected by Cerulean in Bulgarian waters. And we came up with over 170 that we thought to be true slicks. So now this is an interactive map that's available on Greenpeace's website, demonstrating the extent of this problem in a previously overlooked and quite ecologically sensitive area. So there are a lot of potential cases in which we could do this around the world. We've done it in many other regions, but this is just the most recent example from a few days ago. And I mentioned this also to provide some context on how Cerulean can be used and on how we work with partners. So Cerulean's slick detections are the starting point for an investigation. It's an AI model. It can work way faster than we can at analyzing every radar image of the world's ocean and determining where likely slicks are. But it can still make mistakes. It can still produce false positives. So it really needs that additional human touch to review detections. And if you're not comfortable doing that yourselves, then we're very happy to be that human expert for you, to provide some additional support in ensuring that what you're reporting is accurate and unimpeachable. So just some concluding thoughts on the applications of this data. We've seen that generally satellite imagery and AI are unlocking major new insights into the true cost of offshore oil and gas. And this is an issue that just by virtue of being out at sea has been hidden for a long time. And now we're finally starting to see it come to light with new information and really specific data about where this pollution is happening and who the culprits are. This pollution's been underreported, and in addition, the greenhouse gas emissions of the sector are quite significant. Not just obviously the greenhouse gas emissions of burning that oil at the point of use are the subject of significant discussion, but we can't overlook the effect of drilling in progressively deeper waters further offshore in terms of vessel traffic and related pollution. And all of these revelations are unlocking new pathways to change the way people talk about fossil fuels, to alter the political and economic calculus that governments are making when they permit these projects, when they think about how to enforce laws, and to hold industry accountable for behavior that is pervasive but often goes unpunished. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to any questions that folks may have. I've seen some come through the chat, and Christian and I are looking forward to addressing those.
Okay, thank you so much, Eric and Christian. This is a fantastic overview. And so we have actually a bunch of great questions, but just as a reminder to everyone, you can send in your questions through the question and answer panel or through the chat. We'll be monitoring both. Okay, so getting started, let's see. There was a question. I'd like to know more about detection thresholds of this system for smaller spills. The current focus is large infrastructure and vessels, which are important, but there's a lot of repeated chronic oiling associated with smaller vessels and marinas and busy recreational boating areas near shore where it can have more immediate environmental impacts. How small a spill can Cerulean reliably detect? How does it compare with overflight oil spill detection thresholds, for instance, about half a cup? Are there plans to leverage higher resolution data in the future to tackle nearshore chronic oiling?
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit of this. So Cerulean uses Sentinel-1 radar imagery, which roughly has approximately like 10-meter resolution. So we're not going to necessarily be detecting things that are on that sort of like half a cup size. I'm sure that our team has a definitive answer on sort of like the minimum size threshold. But you can, if you sort of explore the Cerulean platform, you have the opportunity to sort of toggle based on the area that you see, or the area, like the area of a slick that you're interested in identifying. Additionally, so right now, nearshore areas are an area like a point of complication, which we're working to improve the capacity of our model to detect slicks near shore. So I think like that's something we could sort of keep an eye out for in the future. And then, sorry, as far as leveraging higher resolution data, I think it's definitely something we'd be interested in too. Right now, our team is really focused on using Sentinel-1 imagery, and I think opportunities to incorporate additional data sources to potentially improve Cerulean are definitely of interest, but it would probably be sort of a combination of factors of like what those sources are, and sort of their level of public or commercial availability.
Okay, thank you so much. There was another question. I mean, it covers some of the same ground, but if you wanted to add anything, which was how do you calculate spill volume?
Yeah, so the way that we calculate spill volume is we use a conservative minimum thickness estimate. So we assume to be based on scientific literature that for a slick to be visible in radar imagery, it has to be at least 1 micron thick. And so we use that thickness as our baseline for all slicks. And so if we have a depth of the oil spill of 1 micron and multiply that by the area, we can come up with the volume. So that's how we come up with volume estimates that we use.
Okay, thank you so much, Christian. Okay, and I'll merge two questions having to do with natural slicks. So one is, so SkyTruth only gathers information on anthropogenic sources of oil slicks, correct? There are a lot of natural sea created oil slicks. And then another one, do you detect chronic oil spills from natural seepages from seafloor hydrocarbon reservoirs?
Yeah, so I think basically the answer is yes. So like the Cerulean platform itself and our model, what it does is it detects slicks visible in Sentinel-1 radar imagery, and from that we then have additional algorithms that associate those slicks with types of source. So our focus has been on matching slicks to vessels and then matching slicks to pieces of fixed oil infrastructure. there is work that we're doing to specifically like highlight slicks that are natural seeps. I don't think those are currently available, but it is sort of in the work. But as you can probably assume, like oil development takes place in locations where these seeps are common. So it's something that we're aware of, and I guess like our identification approach has been based on how can we confidently determine which slicks are associated with infrastructure versus natural seeps. And so expanding that out to identify in the future, like which slicks are natural seeps is of interest.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Christian. Couple about sewage. All right, so I'll merge those two. Can your system also be used to monitor sewage and industrial outfalls that have been shown to emit large amounts of petroleum hydrocarbons? And actually, it's fairly distinct from the other question, which was, is there the potential for Cerulean to detect other kinds of discharges like sewage discharge, which is a major concern for cruise ships?
Yeah, so this is yes, again, these. So basically, the way that Cerulean works, then the way that Sentinel-1 radar imagery works is when we're looking at the surface of the water offshore to identify a slick, what we're essentially looking at is the roughness of the water. So discharge events, whether they be bilge dumping, potentially release of sewage or other effluents from vessels, will create these essentially flatter patches on the water, which Cerulean identifies. So I think in terms of whether we have the capacity to identify them, I think we do. I think where we would want to invest some time in that is like essentially trying to identify which types of slicks may be occurring with vessels, and I think that will require like an additional level of effort from our team to sort of match some of that vessel information to try and differentiate between slick types. I don't want to speak for our model, our AI team when that might be coming, but I think it's definitely an issue that we'd like to look into.
Okay, that's great to hear. We have a bunch of timing related questions, although they're not duplicative, so I'll handle them one by one. What is the time frame that Cerulean covers?
Yeah, so basically from 2020, January 1st, 2023 onwards, and then with specific, depending on the specific geography, there may be additional historical information because we've done deep dive analyses for other organizations in those locations. So for example, in the Brazilian EEZ, you can identify slicks going back to 2019. So and I think there was a question about this as well, so I might be jumping ahead. But in addition to processing new imagery as it comes in, we are also working to sort of build out the back catalog, but both of those take time. So we tend to restrict some of that pre-2023 analysis for specific use cases or studies that other organizations are doing, so we can support that.
Okay, thank you. And the question I think you were answering, I'll go ahead and read it in case there's anything you want to add. Are there plans to process more historical imagery to get a better sense of the cumulative effect of slicks over a longer time window? It would also be useful to be able to see more than 1 year's worth of data in the map viewer.
Yeah, so I think again, there are plans to fill out the back catalog using historic imagery. I think at this point in time, we're really going to be focused on what we can identify from Sentinel-1. And then in terms of what viewing additional timeframes in the web platform, you can manually specify ranges. So I think the default option, there's some options you can choose, like slicks in the last week, last month, last year, but you can manually adjust that to show more than 1 year if you're interested.
Okay. Okay, that's great to know. All right. Thank you, Chris. Let's see. Another timing question. How quickly often is this data updated? Can you see slicks in real time?
So we can't see in real time. I think the sort of the best definition is near real time. And I can't speak to the specific time lag, I mean, I think it's less than a week. Eric, I don't know if you know off the top of your head.
The time lag of a satellite image being analyzed from the
Yeah.
time that it's photographed is a few hours usually, I think. It can vary a little bit, but yeah, it's a few hours for the satellite image to be processed and reach us, and then just a couple of minutes to run the model. So it should be less than a day usually. But the AIS source identification occurs on a 72-hour delay because of the terms of our AIS license. If you have access to an MDA system like Skylight that has a fancier license, then you might be able to get faster AIS data. But on our end, the source identification, if it's a vessel, will take 3 days. But the satellite image itself, like the identification that there is a slick there, should be faster. And you also have to consider the frequency of satellite coverage. Christian may know more than I do about specifically what that coverage looks like in certain regions, but it's usually not daily.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a good thing to highlight. So again, at the risk of like boring everyone with me continuing saying this, well, we are using Sentinel-1, and so there are two Sentinel-1 satellites in operation, A and C, and the collection frequency varies based on geography. So areas specifically in European waters are imaged very frequently. Sometimes you may, yeah, I mean, I think, and I mean, you can have there in certain instances multiple images a day. In other locations, the coast of sub-Saharan Africa or parts of Latin America, the coverage is much less frequent. So you may be talking about sort of maybe 2 to 4 images a month. So it is variable based on geography.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So there were questions about ship-to-ship transfers. So a first question that came in was, can your system detect oil spills from ship-to-ship transfers? And then there was a follow-up question, would it be possible to monitor or flag potential dark oil transfers? Or is the capacity there in combination with MDA platforms like Skylight?
Yeah, I mean, speaking to the capacity to detect them, yes, we are assuming that the interaction is taking place in an area with Sentinel-1 coverage. I think those types of slicks would be something that we would expect to see if it is entering the water. Um, at this point, we don't have a flag for that in terms of a slick. So it would sort of depend on, I think, the movement pattern of the vessels and how they were matched. But I know that our partners at Global Fishing Watch have parameters which they use to flag vessel encounters, and I think it could definitely be worth looking into whether we, in addition to identifying things such as AIS off events, whether an event might be associated with a vessel encounter. I don't know if you want to take the second part of that.
I guess the only thing to add is that ship-to-ship transfers, as many of you know, are sometimes used to launder oil that may be coming from a sanctioned country. So a vessel may not be broadcasting its true AIS location during that activity. That's something that some of our analysts have observed. So it often requires a little bit more digging to find the actual source of a slick that would occur during that kind of activity.
All right, thank you. Good to know. So another question that came in is, how much of the data is ground truth or human accuracy reviewed?
So we ground truthing of these slicks is difficult. I don't know if we have any specifically ground truth slicks. However, we do review slicks, but those efforts are primarily our team is only so big, and so our work to review slicks is sort of done in conjuncture with other organizations' efforts. So if we're working with organizations on a specific story or like trying to highlight pollution events in specific areas or from specific vessels, we will do manual reviews of any any of those slicks associated. I think Eric, maybe you have a better synopsis of how we go about that.
Sure. So I'm not sure I can give you a specific number of slicks that we've reviewed, but generally the way we go about it would be just to check the image. You can see when you click on a slick in Cerulean, the actual radar image pops up. And for an expert, like the people who built Cerulean on our team, who've spent years of their lives looking at these images, it's actually quite easy to tell whether it's a false positive or a true positive. We're familiar with not just what oil slicks look like on satellite images, but where the flaws in the model might be, what might cause the model to say that something's a slick when in reality it could be a weather event. Um, just to discuss like what false positives often are. Often events like slack water between two wind and current patterns may look like an oil slick enough to trick the model, particularly like wind shear coming off of, say, a mountainous island. Certain patterns of sea ice can often confuse the model, which is one reason that we generally don't run it at very high latitudes in the Arctic. So things like this are pretty easy to catch if you just have a human taking a look at it. And that's why we really think of it as the starting point for an investigation, because Cerulean can tell you where to look. You might not have otherwise known to look at specific images on a certain date in a certain location. And then we can review those to tell you whether they're legitimate. The model keeps getting better, but I think for the time being, we're always going to strongly suggest that you have a human who's an expert in oil slick analysis take a look at these.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Christian. Let's see. Another question. Fantastic program. In the US, NOAA has a similar marine pollution surveillance program. How does your program relate to NOAA's program, and do you collaborate with NOAA?
I don't know if Christian has any more information about the technical aspects of it. We've had some discussions with NOAA, just like sharing methodologies and such, but as far as what I can tell in terms of differences, NOAA's program focuses only on the US EEZ and approaches to it. And from what I've seen, they either don't detect sources or they don't make that information available to the public. I'm not incredibly well versed in the program, so apologies if I'm mistaken there, but that does seem to be how it works. And if Christian, do you have any other insight on the methods they use? I think they're not exclusively Sentinel-1 based.
Yeah, I don't. I'm sure though if you're interested in learning a little more about that, we could definitely connect you with the folks on our team who would know more.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Let's see. Another question. Do you plan to add optics?
Yeah, I don't want to promise anything one way or the other. I mean, I think like really our optical imagery presents a lot of there's a lot of interest. I mean, from a purely like scientific side of like trying to develop that, it'd be great. I don't want to speak to what the our team's like specific priority of integrating it into Cerulean is though, because I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and just to add, one advantage of radar over optical imagery is that it's not dependent on conditions like light and weather. So it works, it can see through clouds, it can see at night. And that consistency, first of all, increases the amount of available imagery that we can use because essentially all of it is usable. And secondly, it's consistent in a way that makes an AI model easier to train. I'm not a coder, I'm not an expert in how that works, but I do get the sense that um, it greatly facilitates our ability to achieve that automatic detection that we're very excited about.
Okay.
Oh, and actually, sorry, I do have one more thing to add. If you're interested in seeing optical imagery of a particular incident in Cerulean, that those images are not available on Cerulean, but they are available on SkyTruth Monitor, which is a platform that we've created to allow people to view all the publicly available satellite imagery of a location that they're interested in, alongside certain contextual data like the location of oil pipelines and other industrial sites that might be of interest if you just wanted to take a look at something you saw in Cerulean from all available types of satellite imagery. So that's something we're happy to talk to you about.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Let's see, we still have several more questions. Could your system be used to detect and determine the efficacy of petroleum oil dispersants?
I think that would be difficult. So again, our because we're using Sentinel-1, we have we're limited by the frequency of coverage. And I think to really assess that, we would probably need to. I think there would need to be quite a bit of information on hand about sort of the timing of a slick, and depending on the size and the amount of dispersant used, whether it's even visible in a follow-up image collected. So I think it would be very interesting to look into. I think that in its current state and for quite a while, that will probably be pretty difficult to determine.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Let's see. Um, Another comment question. Just poking around data in my region in the web map and looking at attributes of a spill, potential sources identified are two cruise ships. Are slicks detected reliably known to be oil, or could they be other kinds of discharges based on your comment earlier that even sewage could smooth the surface?
It could be another type of discharge, not necessarily petroleum. So I think as we've touched on a bit, when you're looking at surface smoothness, other oily substances might have similar properties. So some other types of spills that we've identified in Cerulean include fish oil from fishing trawlers, palm oil from palm oil tankers that are washing out their tanks. And that is something to note because those spills might be of environmental concern as well. We've actually had some people say, like, hey, actually, detecting palm oil spills is a feature to us, not a bug, because we want to know where that's happening. But that goes back to my comments about prosecution and why you can't just use a radar images to 100% prove that someone is spilling petroleum-based oil because it can be another substance.
Thank you. Now, the person followed up with another question. Would the discharge necessarily be some kind of oil?
I think
I
it's
wouldn't say
it's
with certainty, Christian.
yeah. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just echoing Eric. I mean, I think it's going to be variable based on the specific vessel and what may be there.
Thank you. Let's see. Is there any priority in spill identification or monitoring for sensitive habitats or protected areas?
Not necessarily priority because the model works on every satellite image, and the Sentinel-1 program doesn't specifically target those areas over any other location. It's just based on the mechanics of the satellite's orbit. But you can turn on MPAs as a filter in Cerulean. You can also create an area of interest that's focused on whatever sensitive region that you're interested in. So you can speed up your own monitoring of spills in that sense, but not necessarily a priority for like the data inputs themselves.
All right. Thank you, guys. Um, does Cerulean proactively investigate suspicious behavior of oil tankers?
No, so what we do is we try and highlight what we think are behaviors of interest associated with vessels. So currently that includes things like whether or not they may have intentionally disabled their AIS for certain periods of time, whether or not slicks associated with those vessels are in sensitive areas like MPAs. Um, I think as with other things, like there's a lot of nuance to what is interesting or concerning, and I think we're very interested in hearing from folks about what those behaviors might be, so we can try and help incorporate some of those flags into Cerulean. If there are behaviors like you're working with or you're aware of that are of high interest to your organization or to your work, we'd love to see if there are ways that we can help flag some of those in Cerulean as well. But I think in terms of us specifically determining whether something is suspicious or not, we're not necessarily making those distinctions.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Christian. Um, let's see, a question about dashboards. Is dashboard building common among your users? Is it possible through downloading along with API interaction, or so is it possible with through API interaction with downloading your tables and design dashboards?
I I think this may be in reference to the work that Eric highlighted. In terms of, I don't want to speak specifically to the dashboard building, but it is possible to download and access Cerulean information via our API, and potentially to incorporate that into your own workflows. I think if you're interested in custom dashboards, that would be something to connect more with our web team on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christian. Um, and sort of one more question. How do you deal with statistical significance in analyzing number of oil slicks and kilometers squared um, impacted with reduced sample size when observations are filtered with criteria such as max source is greater than 0?
Yeah, I unfortunately I don't think I'm the best person to answer that. I mean, our team who's developed this model, I think would be very happy to follow up with you on that. So yeah, please reach out to us afterwards, and we can put you in touch with them.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're out of questions for right now, except for some country-specific ones, which people will want to follow up with you separately for. Thank you guys so much. This was the presentation was great, the demo was great, and there were a lot of great questions, and which you gave good answers to. So we appreciate all the information and all the work that you're doing. We have let everybody know that we will have the recording up later today, and it sounded like we may also be able to post the slides. And I encourage anyone who had further questions to get in touch with Christian and Eric. So thank you everyone for being here today, and thank you all for your work to protect ocean ecosystems. Christian, Eric, we look forward to hearing with further developments of Cerulean when you're ready.
Thank you so much for hosting us. It
Yeah,
was
thank
really
you.
wonderful to speak with you all.
All right, bye everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Take care.